Hi, Michelle. Hi, Dana. Hi, Lindsay. Hi, Williams. It's good to see you. Hi, Monica. Hi, Mary. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Carol. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Albert. Hi, Elaine. Hi, Terry. Hi, Nicole. Hi, Anne. Hi, Melanie. Thanks very much for joining us with this evening session with Peter Rowe. What we'll do is begin. Let's begin right now, if we could. Here's the setup for what we'll be doing tonight is just a couple of minutes for some ground rules and housekeeping, and then Peter Rowe will take over, give us some tips. Then we'll have for 20 minutes or so, then we'll have for 30 minutes, we'll have questions and answers. And what I'd like to ask you to do is, if you would, please put the questions in the chat area. Wendy, Patrick, thanks for writing that. Elaine Masters, thanks for writing that. And so the group, Zoom group chat is where all the questions are going to be. And I'll be looking at those questions and asking Peter to reply to those questions. And Terry Williams will be monitoring that to make sure that I don't forget anything and that I make sure that I'm watching something. And so let's begin. I've already mentioned about muting yourself to keep the broadcast quality as top as possible so we can avoid barking dogs and hearing personal questions from spouses or small children. And then also the questions go through the chat. And thanks very, very much for joining us on this fun and exciting evening. Let me introduce Peter Rowe to you. Peter Rowe is recently retired as a staff writer for the San Diego Union-Tribune. He's a native Californian. He grew up in Encinitas in San Diego's North County. He earned bachelor's degrees in history and journalism from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University. So at Berkeley, he's a Cal Golden Bear, and at Northwestern, he's a Wildcat, okay? And he's also a past president of the National Society of Newspaper Columnists. He's also a former Fulbright Fellow that he spent 6 months in Japan in 2003 on that fellowship. And then Peter reported after college for the Virginian Pilot in Norfolk, Virginia, and the Argus in Fremont, California, and then he joined the San Diego Union-Tribune in 1984. He's written profiles and features. Before retiring in April, he covered the local and national craft beer scene with more than 1,000 columns and articles since 1995. We've all enjoyed Peter's writing for decades. We want to learn how to become a better writer. We can all improve on our written communication and become more reader-focused. And so I'm confident that all of us tonight will learn a few tips. We're very grateful and appreciative of his time and interest. And thank you very much for you joining all of us this evening. And so, Peter, why don't you take it away, share with us, and then we'll be opening up for Q&As.
Great. Well, listen, thank you, Rick and Terry. It's a great honor and privilege to be here with all of you. And I was especially excited about being here tonight because I had been at an earlier one of these that Roger Sholey conducted, and I found myself nodding along, as Roger was making his presentation, agreeing with everything he was saying. So I'm not going to repeat what Roger said. It was all good advice. I'm going to try and do a little bit different. I wanted to share some of the things that I think about when I'm writing, and some of the things that have worked for me, and then some of the things that haven't worked. And maybe if we have time afterwards, we can get some of your things that work or don't work, because I'm always learning, and I really want to hear from you folks. So I spent 43 years in newspapers, and during that time, there were a number of occasions where I thought, man, I could be making more money doing something else. And that's true. There are other jobs where you could make probably a lot more money. But then I always balanced it with the job that would pay you more, would it be as much fun? No. And generally the jobs that are more fun don't pay as well. Or, you know, I don't have the skills to be a Major League Baseball player. That would be more fun, and more money. But at any rate, so it's really been a terrific career. I love the profession. It's afforded me so many opportunities. And I mean, for instance, I was never a foreign correspondent, but you know, I was able to report from 7 different countries. I never was and never really wanted to be a political reporter, and yet I was able, you know, to file from the White House press room and to cover.
Definitely music, Coca, no question. Thank you.
Cover a national convention. I wrote color pieces from President Clinton's inauguration and from profiled the last Republican to run for governor in California, John Cox. I'm really a human interest writer. I think I always have been, and yet I've written about animals, and I was able to ride an elephant and ride a bull on separate occasions. And even after my brief tenure as a military writer, I was flown onto and catapulted off of aircraft carriers and had the really rare honor to be able to interview veterans of World War II, American, Japanese, and German veterans, as well as survivors of Nazi death camps and American internment camps. I swear, and I think I can get witnesses that I'm not an alcoholic, and yet I was able to drink my way through 4 Great American Beer Festivals and 2 World Beer Cup competitions. So, as I said, it's really a fun profession. I've had a great time. But it's not always an easy profession. And, you know, all of you know, witnessed, you know, the kind of economic turmoil that's hit journalism. You've seen news organizations go out of business. You've seen politicians, actually for decades, this isn't anything new, taking aim at the news media. So it's been some tough times. And in fact, I've been through 2 newspaper mergers and at least a half dozen rounds of layoffs. And I survived all of them until April when I took a buyout and left the Union-Tribune. So I think that, you know, some of the reason I survived, some of the reasons are due to just luck and good timing. But there may be some other reasons as well. And I was thinking about this and I came up with 6 reasons. Maybe it's only 5. Journalists and math, you know, you always have to double check. But here are some reasons that I think might have helped. One is flexibility. I always said yes, and I wrote for the A section, I wrote for local news, I wrote for, back when we had a feature section, I wrote for and later edited the feature section, wrote for sports, I wrote for business, travel, arts. I did, yes, and I'm proud of it. I created the beer beat, but I also inherited the religion beat, and that was equally fascinating and rewarding. My final month at the Union-Tribune, I volunteered to work Saturday shifts because I enjoy them. The Saturday shift is normally a quick turnaround feature story. You know, you get in, you get out, you write the piece, you go home. That's so rewarding. But also, I mean, it bolstered my reputation as a team player, which I think is a really terrific reputation to have. So that's one, is flexibility. 2 is engagement. I sat for years, I sat next to John Wilkins, who's a terrific feature writer. And I cannot tell you the number of times I turned to John and said, how do we do this? You know, what's the secret here? And part of that is, you know, honest bewilderment. You know, it's like every piece kind of baffled me, but part of it is just realizing that you have to come at the story fresh. You can't have, I mean, we all have things that we fall back on. We all have habits. We all have sort of writerly tics, but you want to avoid those as much as possible and be fresh with the material. Third, I think, is passion. And I think it's kind of like sex. I mean, you can't be faking it, or if you are faking it, your partner, or in this case, the reader, will know something's wrong. And what will happen is that your copy will be stale, it will be dull. The reader will pick up on it that you're not into this. And so why should they be, right? Fourth, I would say, is respect. The people that you talk to and that you write about, treat them like family. And I mean that, you know, we all have relatives who are crazy, who have offensive opinions, who you really don't enjoy spending time with, but, you know, treat them with respect and consideration and a little bit of compassion too. I think that's really important. We don't know everything. We don't, you know, we have to cut people some slack. Fifth is be responsive. Starting to sound like the Scout oath, you know. Be responsive. Return phone calls and emails from readers who are responding to you and your work. They maybe are responding in hostile and abusive ways. I would still respond to them with email saying, thank you for your note. Maybe that's all I would say is thank you for your note if they were really, really way out there. But if they called and left a message and left a phone number, I would make an effort to call them back. And then if they were really angry, really abusive, I would just introduce myself and say, you left a message about something I wrote, and I just wanted to make sure that, you know, you didn't have anything else you wanted to say. And invariably, the other thing they want to say is, I apologize, I'm so sorry, you know, I went off, I shouldn't have done that. But then they might, you know, kind of add a little bit more on their perspective, why they thought I was so wrong. And often I am wrong, so that's fine. So as an example of that, I had just started writing the beer column 25 years ago, and I wrote a column about India Pale Ales, IPAs. And IPAs were fairly new on the market then, and they were certainly new to me. And I made a lot of errors in the IPA column. And at any rate, I came in that morning to the office, and there was a message, recorded message, and the man was angry and telling me I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was a total buffoon. And he left his name and phone number, and so I called him back. And it turned out it was Tommy Arthur, who at the time was the brewmaster at Pizza Port in Solana Beach. He's since gone on to great things. He is the co-owner and brewmaster at the Lost Abbey in San Marcos. And he is world renowned especially for barrel-aged beers. I mean, he knows so much. And so I called him back, and he continued to yell at me. He didn't apologize right away. He continued to yell at me and tell me how wrong I was. And I told him, listen, I'm new. I'm learning this stuff. And he took pity on me. And over the years, Tommy has been a great source. And he has, at various beer conferences, he would seek me out, and he would grab me and take me around and show me why certain beers were so great. I mean, what it was that he was picking up from these beers, which as a non-brewer, I had no idea. Tommy is terrific. So it was really a valuable lesson and a great encounter for me. It really paid off. So now I'm just going to toss out a couple of tips and tricks. So I guess this is 6. One is let the story guide you. Don't try and slop the story into some preconceived, put it into this mold. And we have all had editors who have done this, right? They come to you with an idea for the story, but they know what the story is. And this is before any reporting's been done. So resist that. Instead, do the reporting, then decide what the story is. Now, I had promised, I had tweeted out that I would share with you the 3 most horrifying, shocking words that I ever heard in an interview. And again, I mean, you don't know, right? You don't know when you go into your reporting what it is you're going to find. So this was when I was writing a lifestyle column, and I had like a day to do the reporting and a day to write the column. And the column, it was a real sweet feature about this man who lived on this very busy road, and in his yard he would post kind of Burma shave signs, right? So there would be 3 signs, and you would have to read all 3 to get to the punchline. And he kind of mixed it up, so it was like every week there was a different one, and people would drive by just to see what they were. And it was fun, right? It was really fun. And this guy was cute and fun. And so I went to his house and I was interviewing him, and I asked him about, how he got started on this. And then he uttered the 3 words that blew my mind, and suddenly I couldn't focus. It was like, oh my God, what, so the 3 words were "after my castration." And so now I'm not listening to him. Now I'm looking at him really closely, like, does he have any facial hair? And, and I'm listening to the voice, not for what he's saying, but for the timbre, what happened here? But anyway, I actually kind of did somewhat recover after that. But we'll get back to the post-castration story later. Right now, I want to make a quick cut to a few more tips. And I'm sorry if that sounded like a double entendre, but at any rate, so other tips. When inspiration fails to provide a lifeline, just focus on clarity. I mean, we've all been there, like thinking, I know there's a great lead. I know there's a great way to say this. It's escaping us. If it really isn't coming, don't try and force it. Instead, just try and be clear. When inspiration does strike, don't just surrender to it right away. Throw it up on the screen and play with it for a while. Don't go with your first impulse. I mean, often something that seems really perfectly great to you needs a little bit of work, needs some polishing. Make cliches work for you rather than against you. Cliches are great because we know, we as readers, we know when we see the beginning of a cliche, we know where it's going. It was the best of times. I know it's going to be, it was the worst of times, right? So if you can set up that expectation with the reader and then flip it, you've surprised the reader. And I think readers really enjoy surprises that are fair surprises, right? So, one cliche that came to mind is there's no time like the present. And yet you can easily see where there might be a story or a column where the lead could be, there's no present like the time, right? So you just flip it around and you get a different meaning, and you surprise the reader, and you surprise them in a good way. When you're reporting, sometimes the most important thing is just that you're present, that you're there. I was sent out, this was years ago, when Chuck Yeager had, excuse me, do you know who Chuck Yeager is? He was the test pilot that at least the movie The Right Stuff started with. He was the first guy to break the sound barrier. He's a legendary pilot. And so Tom Wolfe's book came out, The Right Stuff, and it had a lot to do with Chuck Yeager. So Chuck Yeager, years later, came out with his autobiography called Yeager, and he was touring the country to promote the book. And in his tour, he was piloting himself, city to city. So he had a new model Learjet, custom made for him, and he was in the Learjet with PR people from Bantam, his publisher, I don't know, a couple of other folks. And so the newspaper flew me out to Houston to meet up with him, and then to catch a ride with Chuck Yeager and fly back. We were flying back to Los Angeles. So at any rate, I flew into Houston the night before. I was to meet him and checked into the hotel. And then the next morning, I'm in the hotel lobby, and Chuck Yeager comes storming into the lobby with his entourage, and he's yelling. He's saying, you know, those goddamn idiots at Hobby, they don't know, blah, 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 you know, what they're doing. He was upset with the air traffic controllers at Hobby, one of the airports in Houston. And so I had my notebook, which I almost always have with me, and my pen, and I'm taking notes. And he stops and he says, "Who the hell are you?" And I told him, I introduced myself, you know, I'm here to do the story. And he said, "Well, that was all off the record." And I said, "Well, General, we should probably talk about, you know, rules of the road and when you want to go off the record, when you want to go on the record, stuff like that." And he turned on his heel and he said, "That's it." And he marched out of the lobby with the entourage. It was like, so, and I'm there in Houston, and that guy's my ride home. It's like, I can't be ditched by Chuck Yeager. And so Stuart Applebaum, who was a PR guy for Bantam, he came back and he grabbed me and he said, "Just come with us, shut your mouth." So I did. I came with them. I shut up. I was quiet for the rest of the day. He did a bunch of TV and radio interviews that morning in Houston, and then did, you know, a newspaper interview. And I didn't say a word. I was just a fly on the wall. But I took notes. I took a lot of notes. And then our car took us out to the airport, and his Learjet is waiting. And I just quietly followed everybody else, you know, got on the plane, didn't get tossed off. And so we take off, and then Chuck Yeager hands the controls off to his co-pilot. And he walked back and he sat down next to me and he said, "You've got a lot to learn." And I just said yes. And then he gave me a great interview. It was great, you know. And then we flew out. When we came out over Santa Monica, you know, his approach took him out over the ocean, but then his approach took him into a barrel roll, which was totally illegal. And he looked back at me and he said, "That was turbulence." And I just said yes. And I did not include that in the story. I had enough good material already, and I thought, I don't want that guy coming back on me. So at any rate, but be present, and you'll see stuff and hear stuff that will be useful to your story. All right, so back to my castrated interviewee. It did seem like kind of a sensitive subject, but you know, he was the guy who had brought it up. And again, I'm sorry if these sound like double entendres, but I mean, it's true, right? So I did ask him, "Well, what happened?" And he told me what had happened. He had had an accident. He had been a merchant marine, a seaman, and he had been, something had dropped on him and crushed, you know, a fair amount of his body. And so, surgery took place, but his marriage did not survive. So he was a lonely guy. He was a guy, he'd made peace with what had happened, but the Burma shave signs were really his way of kind of reestablishing some human connection out there, and having people look at him, as a good guy, not as somebody who had this horrible accident. So at the time, I was younger, and I didn't have really the confidence or maybe the chops to kind of work that into the piece. And I really ignored it. I put it aside. I figured, well, the reader doesn't need to know that. But I think if I was doing that column today, I would definitely use that. I would just use that about his humanity, that, his humanity was still intact, even if some of his equipment wasn't. But that's what I was talking about. We continue to learn stuff, always learning stuff, and that's where I'm at today, still learning, and happy to be with you all. So there you are. That's the presentation. Any questions?
Thank you. That was just terrific, Peter. Gosh, the stories, we will remember those stories forever and ever.
Well,
sure. Okay, here's a couple questions. Here we go with questions. And if you just joined us, let me say that you're watching a live Zoom presentation from the San Diego Press Club. This is Write Better Right Now, the latest in a series of 1-hour free writing workshops with veteran print and broadcast journalists and authors that are sharing the best writing tips with all of us Press Club members. And we're very grateful to have Peter Rowe with us. The rules is that if you have a question, go to the chat box there on I think it's on the right-hand side of your screen. Write the question there. This is the fastest 59 minutes in the history of Zoom broadcasting. So we're going to be going back and forth until 7 o'clock with all of your questions. And so keep putting those questions in. And let me start out by saying, here's one from Michelle. As a food writer, I'm interested in your perspective on the different approach you take with something experiential like beer versus hard news. What are the similarities? What are the differences?
Yeah, I mean, I also, for a brief period of time, was a food critic or a restaurant critic. And I think that it's so difficult. It is such a tough job. There are only so many ways you can say delicious or terrible, or, I liked it, I didn't like it. But again, I mean, there are some things that carry over when I'm writing about beer. When I am writing about beer, I still am writing about beer. I try to describe the beer. I try to describe, what it looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like, to convey that to the reader. I think that's more important than me saying, I give this a thumb up or a thumb down, is to give them an idea of why I'm liking it, why I'm not liking it. I'm a history geek. And so, every story, even if it's about beer, a substance, is really about people. I like to interview the brewmasters and figure out what it is that they had in mind, where they're coming from. Often beer styles have interesting stories behind them. They have interesting histories. I mentioned the IPA, the India Pale Ale. It has a fascinating history. We don't have time for it here. But if you're ever super bored sometime, look it up. It's very interesting. So, I mean, you can still do interviews as you do with a hard news story, but I approach beer writing and food writing as a feature writing, and so I'm looking for more color. But again, I'm trying to interview people. I'm trying to get background. I'm trying to get fact as well. So.
So, here's one from Terry. This says, here's a question from Terry. How do you stay relevant writing on a lot of different topics instead of finding a niche?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's one of the reasons I guess I would turn to John Wilkins and say, how do we do this? The terror, you know, that I face or have often faced is, you know, going into a topic that I really don't know anything about. Yet it's also the excitement. You know, it's very interesting. I mean, you have to be curious and you have to want to study up on stuff. But then I think it's very rewarding. I did for a number of years at different newspapers, not at the Union, have a beat, and I found that with a beat you develop a certain mastery of your topic, right? So for a while I covered courts in Virginia, and after a while, you know, I knew some things about how the courts operated. I knew some things about, you know, lawyers I could talk to, lawyers who wouldn't talk to me. You know, you kind of knew your way around. I also was on the military beat for a couple of years, and that too, you know, you kind of learn a little bit about the culture and who will talk to you and who won't. So there are real advantages, I think, to working a beat, but I found that after a while I got kind of bored, because with a beat, there are certain stories you have to cover, right? You have to. There's a new aircraft carrier coming to Norfolk, Virginia, and you're in the military, right? You got to write about that. But it's kind of a dull story. It's like, you know, this big thing is coming. Whereas if you could approach that as a feature story, then it becomes, to me, a lot more interesting. So the relevance, I think, is in finding the human connection. We're all people. We're all curious about other people and their lives and their careers. So I really think that you got to go after the humanity of your subjects.
Great, great. Here's a question from Mary that could you talk about your approach to sourcing and building rapport with people, and especially in times when it's a topic that's new to you?
Yeah, sourcing or building rapport with people. I mean, that's really the game, right? I mean, for instance, going back to Chuck Yeager, when he left, I mean, even if Stuart Applebaum hadn't come and rescued me, I would have followed, because I didn't have any other choice. So you do the best you can, and you try and find some common ground. I was thinking about one of the last stories I did for the Union-Tribune, and that was about a family who's they were dealing with I think he's now three-year-old boy who was born without a thymus, which is an important part of your. I'm going to quickly get lost. I mean, you know, I don't know anything about biology. I don't know anything about medicine, right? So I had to rely on talking to doctors and talking to other people about what is athymia. You know, what does that mean to this little boy, to Charlie? So I had written about it before, and this, one of the last stories was Charlie actually got his thymus. He got a thymus transplant. But again, I was so much at sea in terms of explaining how a transplant would work, and explaining, you know, kind of the science behind the thymus, that I really relied on doctors and the family as well. Fortunately, the family knew me. But initially, when I met the family, I just made a real point of going slow with them about their story. They had already told Children's Hospital they wanted to do the story, but I wanted to go slow with them so that they understood I was going to take my time. To try and understand what they were going through, because it wasn't really a medical story. It was really a story about a family. that was dealing with pretty extraordinary circumstances.
Here's
I'm not
an
man
interesting. Oh, go ahead.
question, but yeah, I'm just chatting away. So go ahead.
No, that's great. That's great. Here's a story. Here's a question rather from Dina, who says, "I learned to research stories before the interview, having been trained to know the answers before asking questions. But the story never went where I thought it would go." What's your take on that?
It sounds like you did a great job. I mean, in both cases, I think it is important to research as much as you can before the interview and to have some idea of what the answers are going to be. And yet, you know, people are people, and maybe their take is going to be a little bit different, or maybe what they said in an interview 10 years ago is not what they're going to say today. We all learn, we all change. And I think that's terrific that the story didn't go where you thought it would. I think for us, you know, as writers, surprise is so important. You know, we get a certain amount of, you know, we get jazzed by these surprises that we run across. And that really, I think, is part of what he's talking about with the passion, right? Is that if you can share that surprise with the reader, I mean, you know that it surprised you, so you have, you know, that audience of one that you've already tested this on. If you can then try and recreate that experience for the reader, I think it really livens the copy.
Oh, here's a question from Nicole. When you did your story about Pablo Escobar's hippos, when did you get to visit them in Colombia?
Unfortunately, that was all done from here. That was all research, you know, reading about Pablo Escobar's hippos in previous stories that have been done. There were a couple of books about Escobar, including Killing Pablo, the Mark Bowden book, that had descriptions. And I stole, you know, shamelessly. I wish I could have gone down to Colombia and visited the hippos, but it wasn't to be.
Here's one from Tony. When you work with a unique bucket of words or terms when writing on a specific subject, like food or travel, do you work with a unique bucket of words or terms when writing on a specific travel? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's something to guard against, right? I mean, there are certain things that you really can't avoid. You're in your genre, right? You're writing about food, you're writing about travel. There are certain words that you're going to use, but if you can guard against using them over and over and over, that really helps. By the way, Tony, is it Tony D? Is that the Tony? Yeah. I love your backdrop. That's awesome, especially with the wind blowing the pond. That's terrific. Yeah. Wish we were there with you. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Do you have a favorite interview question? Something that really elicits a compelling or surprising response from your interviewee? Monica's asking that question.
Okay. You're always looking for that, right? For the question that's really going to be fun or interesting or revealing. If you're doing a profile, sometimes it can work if you ask, what's in your pockets? You know, can you empty your pockets for me? Can I see what's in your pockets? Because sometimes there's some interesting stories behind the crap we carry around. That's one. Another one that is good for profiles, I think, is a two-parter. It's like, who should I talk to who knows you really well? You know, tell me friends, colleagues, you know, people I should talk to. And then they'll, you know, usually they come up with a couple of folks and you say, and who do you not want me to talk to? Who really, really hates you? And sometimes they'll go along with us and say, oh, this woman, she just hates me, or this guy, you talk to them. And then, of course, you make sure you talk to them. You know, that's where you're going to get some good, yeah.
That's right. That's great. Leslie's saying that I find that the best quotes in my interviews tend to show up when I ask the last question. Anything else to add? Do you have recommendations for crafting better questions that might bring surprising and thoughtful answers?
Well, anything else to add? I mean, that's a great question. You should always, you know, close out by, you know, asking something along those lines. Over the years, I kind of preferred to go with, what am I missing? What did I not ask you that you thought for sure, you know, this guy's going to ask? And sometimes you get a good response there. Finding the key to your subject is so important. I think when you're writing a profile, it's a mistake to think that you're writing a biography. You're not. You're writing a story. You're writing a piece of this person. There's a reason why, right? There's a reason why we're doing a profile of this person. So you're not presenting the whole person. You're really homing in. I mean, I think in features, every story has, you know, kind of a surface subject, but then it has the real subject, you know, right? You know, you're writing about a boy without a thymus. Well, that's the surface subject, but really you're writing about a family under stress. That's the real story. The real story is, how are they coping with this incredible stress, right? To go back to that just for a minute, for years, they've been sheltering in place, but radically sheltering in place, because any kind of virus, any kind of, you know, just a simple cold could kill this kid. So they're the most extreme sheltering in place folks you've ever met, and they've been doing it for a couple of years. So that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. You're just as a reminder, you're watching a Zoom broadcast with the San Diego Press Club. This is Write Better Right Now, which is a webinar that a series of webinars that we're having with a series of writers, veteran writers, so we can become all better writers in broadcast and for broadcast journalists as well as print journalists, so we can become have better writers and learn some of their favorite writing tips. So if you've missed any portion of this broadcast, don't worry, because it's going to be videotaped, or it's going to be taped, and the link will be on the San Diego Press Club website that you can look at a later time at your convenience. Let me remind you that this is the fastest 59 minutes in the history of Zoom broadcasting, and if you have a question, put it to the Zoom group chat, and we'll get that question answered. We have about 10 minutes left. Peter, I had a question about, I make my living as a PR guy, but I'm also teaching online at a university, a writing class. What would you say? What would you say to students about journalism, and what would you say to students just about writing in general?
Well, first of all, hats off to you, Rick, for teaching a writing class. I taught writing at feature writing at Point Loma Nazarene for about 10 years, and you don't realize until you start teaching a class how much you know, how much stuff is second nature to you. That you really have to start at this real ground level. You don't realize how much stuff you do all the time that is kind of mystifying or news to students. So what I'd say to students is, I mean, obviously, listen to your instructor, but read and find writers who speak to you, who really you like their voice. And voice, we haven't talked about voice, but I think voice is so important, so critical, especially in feature writing. And that's that sense that there's a real person behind these words, not that the person, is writing in the first person, I tried to avoid that, I, me, my, try to avoid all that, and instead, but, present myself through the perspective that I have. And we all have, right? We all come to our stories with a personal perspective. But in terms of journalism in the future, I think, yeah, I think there's always going to be a call for storytellers. There's always going to be a call for people who can take information and present it clearly and concisely, and with a certain amount of interest, flair, voice. But students today are going to also have to master a lot of things that I never had to worry about, about how to edit video, how to edit audio, how to tell the story on multiple platforms. What we're doing here tonight is something that is relatively new to me. I'm sure it's new to a lot of journalists, but this is the way we're going. We're becoming multimedia, and you have to be more flexible than ever, it's a real challenge.
Here's a question from Dana. Do you ever edit quotes to make an interview subject sound smarter or more eloquent than he, she sounded like? Or also even perhaps punctuation, putting in a who instead of that, or something like that.
Right. I remember the same question was asked of Roger. This is such a tough issue, because you want to respect the people you're writing about, your sources. You want to respect them, and also, I'm taking notes. I'm not recording. So for the most part, I'm going to give the source the benefit of the doubt. If I look at my notes and they're saying that instead of which, and it should be, I'll go with the which. I don't know that I'm trying to make them look smarter. I'm just trying to be fair to them, and present what it is they said in a way that's understandable. So it's really difficult. When you do tape record interviews, and I have done that in the past on rare occasions, you notice how often our conversations don't track. And really, we start on this one topic, and then, oh, by the way, we're off somewhere else. And and there's a lot of, ums and ers, and if you were to just transcribe what people said, I don't think that's fair. I think then they look like maroons, right? But really they're just being human. They're being like all of us. So I would take the us out and, kind of link it, and I would cut out, I would use an ellipse, and I would cut out any of these irrelevant side paths that people are going down.
Okay, last call for questions, but let me ask Peter, anything else to add? Just like your best interview when you asked the last question. Anything else to add? Since we got a few minutes remaining.
Sure. When I started out in this profession, I hated. Maybe hate's too strong a word. When I was a student, when I was a kid, I hated writing. I just hated it. It was so difficult. It was so hard. And in sixth grade, we had an assignment. We had 20 spelling words every week. And every Friday, we had to turn in an essay using all 20 words. And so that was Friday morning. And I would procrastinate and put that off because I hated the assignment. And I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning on Friday and kind of write a terrible essay just because I hated doing it. And it was only later that I kind of realized the fun, the pleasure, the joy, of writing, and really the privilege, right, that we have to express ourselves. All of us could attend the next session of Nuts and Bolts, Write Better Right Now, and write a story about it, and all of us would write a different story because we're all unique individuals. We all see things differently. So again, I mean, it is such a privilege to be able to do that, and also, I mean, it's such an honor to have people read your stuff, even if they get pissed off. I mean, at least you've moved them, right? You've read them on a certain level.
Albert, 2 more questions. Albert
All right.
says, what words do you think are highly overused in reporting? And Mario says, how has news feature writing changed from where you started your career compared to today?
Well, I try not to think about words that are highly overused. I don't want them to get into my head. I'm sure we could all come up with lists of words that are overused, but I mean, awesome. I tend to fall back often on terrific. If I like stuff, I got to stop doing that. I know that there are some great ones out there, some great horrible words that are overused, and I feel like I'm letting you down by not coming up with them, but I think we all know them when we see them, right? It's like pornography. It's like, that's pretty terrible. So, and what was the other question?
The other question was, how has news and feature writing changed from when you started your career compared to today?
Yeah, well, I can speak more to the feature writing, how that's changed. Well, for one thing, I mean, the Union-Tribune no longer has a features section. So features tend to be more, invariably, they're news features, right? They're features being written off of something in the news, as opposed to like Chuck Yeager. That was a profile, but it was a kind of a book story. We hardly ever do book stories anymore. So that's pretty much dead, which is a shame, I think, because San Diego historically, I think still is one of the top book selling markets in the country. People read here. So that's changed. Yeah, I remember an editor taking me aside once and saying it's no longer enough that the story is interesting. It has to also be, relevant to today's news and answer questions about how am I living today. And I think maybe Pablo Escobar's hippos had nothing to do with how we live today, really. I mean, the hippos are down there, and we're not going to see them. They may roam, but not in our lifetime. Our children's, grandchildren's, great-grand, they're never going to see those hippos, crossing the border. But it was just interesting. So, and there was a slight hook in that the guy studying the hippos is at UCSD, and he had written a paper, for a journal, whatever.
Very, very good. This has been the fastest hour in Zoom broadcasting history, and we thank Peter and everyone. And in a minute, I'm going to toss it back to Terry, who's going to unmute everybody so we can all say bye at the same time. But Terry, back to you. Go ahead, Peter.
I interrupt you. I saw that there are at least 2 people here that I know, and I probably have missed other people. Hey, Ina. Yeah, Ina. And there was Ann Jarmusch and Dell. Dell, where are you? Anyway, I mean, a number of folks, Michelle, Dell Willett, a number of folks that I know or have met, over the years. And it's just really happy to see you all, and thank you for being here.
I was thinking, Peter, I think I met you when you first started almost.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah. Well, hope that was a good encounter.
Absolutely.
I'm a nicer person today.
Impossible.
Terry, it's all yours. Wrap it up, please.
Thanks, I will. I want to, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I clicked on the wrong thing. I want to thank you all for being here. This has been an absolute treasure of a Zoom meeting. We're very excited about the opportunity to do these virtually. We're getting huge audiences for them, and I think that we're delivering a lot of really fascinating information. I want to encourage those of you who aren't members to join the San Diego Press Club. We're going to obviously continue this series of nuts and bolts workshops online, but also our Excellence in Journalism contest starts accepting entries on July the 1st. We have decided to have a virtual awards event in October 27th. Put that on your calendar now. We've got lots and lots of awesome ideas for doing it virtually and giving everybody opportunities to participate. So that'll be real. We hope it'll be an exciting virtual awards event. That's all I have to say. Thank you all so very much for being here, and keep your eye on the foghorn because there's going to be another one in a couple weeks.
Okay.
Great. And so you'll unmute everybody and we can say goodbye to each other.
Everybody has to unmute themselves. I don't see a global way to do it.
How's that?
Works
No.
for me.
Participants are unmuted. I think.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Peter. This was
Bye,
great.
Terry.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Terry.
Have a nice evening.
You too.
Two.
Join me in Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tony.
We're loving that, Tony. Yeah. Keep that up.
We'll be right there. Thanks for joining us, Dawn.
All right. Bye-bye.